Uh, she is a great writer. Already she has written 15 books. She left the teaching job. ఉపాధ్యాయ వృత్తిని వదిలేసి కేవలం రచనలకు మాత్రమే అంకితమయ్యి రాస్తున్న వ్యక్తి. ఇవాళ రచనలు అంటే ప్రజల పక్షాన నిలబడి ప్రజల వ్యధలు, బాధలు, కష్టాలు, నష్టాలన్నిటినీ రాసి నిలబడటం ఎంత ధైర్యమో గౌరీ లంకేష్ మన ముందు ఉంచిపోయారు. అయినప్పటికీ అంతటితో ముగుస్తుంది అని భ్రమలు పడుతున్న సందర్భంలో మన ముందు యంగ్ లేడీ రైటర్ మీనా హ్యాస్ ఆల్రెడీ on the dais. I request Meena to speak. మిత్రులారా, టైం తక్కువ ఉన్నందుకు ట్రాన్స్లేషన్ చేయలేకపోతున్నాం. ట్రై టు అండర్స్టాండ్. జాగ్రత్తగా వింటే సింపుల్. ఐ రిక్వెస్టెడ్ మీనా టు స్పీక్ ఇన్ సింపుల్ టర్మ్స్, స్లోలీ, యూజింగ్ సింపుల్ వర్డ్స్.
Good morning, everyone. I never expected that this kind of day will happen, you know, because last year in May we released in 2023. Arundhati Roy was there, Comrade D. Raja was there, Comrade Vasantha was there. And at that time, our biggest dream was that Sai should come out of prison. And in our minds, we always thought that when he is out of prison, he is going to live forever. The fact that something so tragic could happen, you know, it did not even cross our mind. I met him for the first and the last time on April 5 in Delhi, in his Delhi home, and we, you know, spent some time together. We had dinner together that Vasantha Akka had cooked. And even at the time, he was so joyful and political and, you know, full of energy and happiness that nothing could foreshadow what has happened. So, to stand today at his memorial and speak about Sai in the past tense feels like a cruelty has happened to us, feels like one more extension of the many atrocities that we face, that we could not even enjoy 1 year of Sai's life outside prison, that it's only 200 days or something, and then, you know, what has happened to him for those 10 years in jail, it took away his life. So I want to start, because I'm speaking in English and Comrade Lakshman has told me to talk slowly, I have made a lot of notes. I will not take more than 15-20 minutes, but please hear me out. If I hope there is at least a summary, if not a translation. So the first thing I wanted to say, it's not even about Professor Sai, it is about what led here, what led us to this meeting, what led us to this auditorium, what has led us to, you know, seeing Sai as a photo and not as a living presence. And I think the first culprit of this whole thing is P. Chidambaram, is UAPA, and it is Operation Green Hunt. Today his son goes on Twitter and says, the state killed him. Karthi Chidambaram, who is the state? The state was your own father. The state was Operation Green Hunt. The state was what went after people who supported people's resistance. The state was what went after academics. Today you cannot blame the state just because it's headed by Modi. It was P. Chidambaram's brainchild, this UAPA, which sees my comrades in prison in Bhima Koregaon, which sees what has happened to Professor Saibaba. And it is easy now for a lot of us to even consider Rahul Gandhi as progressive, but the history of what the Congress has done is only been continued by the BJP, sharpened by the BJP, and made into a total instrument of terror by the BJP. And I also think that after the culpability of, the blood on his hands that Chidambaram has, the second blood on the hands, and primarily the first is possibly Narendra Modi. You went everywhere and talked about urban Naxal, urban Naxal, urban Naxal. You said these are the most dangerous people in this country. These are the people who are terrorists. And what did it lead to? It led to Marxist voices. It led to poets. It led to intellectuals spending years and years and years in prison. What has it led to? It's not just the fact that, Professor Sai has died or Professor Anand was in jail or poet like Varavara Rao was in jail. It also has led to a silence. Today I see this meeting and I see, okay, everybody is my age or older than my age. Everybody is around their 40 or older. Where are all the young people? The young people cannot come or not here because they cannot speak. We are living in this culture of silence. Only if you have intellectuals of one generation speaking, the next generation can follow. The next generation can come and fight. The next generation can stand up for what is right. But what have you done? What have you done with this urban Naxal thing? Is that you have silenced all the voices. You have made everyone afraid of jail. You have made everyone saying that if you speak, if you are in the academia and you speak, if you are a poet and you speak, if you are a journalist and you speak, what happens to you is what happens to Gauri Lankesh. What happens to you is what happens to Professor Saibaba. What happens to you is what happens to Professor Anand Chetunde. What happens to Professor Varavara Rao. So this is the kind of, intellectual terrorism and climate that has been created in this country. And this is such an urgent, important thing to speak about. When I want to talk about Saibaba, yesterday I went and I was looking through my email because, to find out, memory is short, especially in the age of social media. And I found that my first interaction or knowledge of Sai was 10 years ago. So in May, the Maharashtra police, or the Gajroli police, had basically kidnapped a professor from a Delhi university. He was kidnapped, abducted, and then, imprisoned, and then the terrorism and other charges were filed. You tell me, is it possible in this country that this thing can happen so much in broad daylight, and so much of what happened? It shows the complete collapse of, law and order. And the fact is, this is, in 10 years, like Professor Haragopal pointed out, which I could understand with Manjira's translation, is that not everybody, but a lot of people who fought for his release, whether it is Rona Wilson, whether it is Professor Hani Babu, whether it is Anand Teltunde, whether it is Gautam Navlaka, whether it is Shoma Sen, people who spoke for Sai, just like Sai spoke for, the victims of Operation Green Hunt, the people who were encountered because of the Adivasi resistance and the state oppression on that. Everybody who spoke for Sai's release were also targeted under the same UPA, under the same UFA. And I know, secondly, of Professor Saibaba, and in fact, in a way in which I no longer can divide between what is the personal and what is the political, is that I know him through Comrade Vasanta. And then I know him through his writings, because I had both the honor and the privilege of reading his poetry and trying to get it published. And fourthly, I know him because of, my very brief meeting. So when I want to talk about all of this, the first is, I want to talk about his arrest, because it was, as I said to you, it was not an arrest, it was a kidnap. And the second is the kind of custodial torture that happened to him. And we have to speak this because we have become this has happened so many times to so many people that we have a culture of numbness about it. We no longer are outraged about the kind of things that happened. And I think in some place, Professor Sai actually talks about the fact that when he was asking for medical help and, to be taken to a hospital, he says, I was treated like a garbage bag. I was just thrown around. I was not even, given the basic care. This lack of medical care. Today, if he dies for something as simple as a gallbladder surgery, for something that, has become as common as appendicitis, and I'm not a doctor. What have they done to his body? What have they done to him in 10 years of jail? How much his health has deteriorated? But we also have, and I think when we talk about this prison system, it's not just the life of the prison, but it's also the mental prison which the Indian court occupies. because the Indian court, the Supreme Court sat on a Saturday. These are judges who take vacation for 2 months. These are judges who, don't turn up when they don't feel like turning up. But the same people who take vacation for 2 months, who have this infinite backlog of cases, they sat on a Saturday just to deny bail to him. Justice Belar Trivedi and Justice M.R. Shah. We should never forgive these names or forget these names. And then what we also see, and which is our responsibility, is to fight against the same law against which he was incarcerated, because this is a trial that went on for so long. And I also think that some of what the prison has done to Professor Sai was that for 10 years, in many ways, we should also not forget what they said in the court. I think on 16th October 2022, literally 2 years before his demise, they said the brain is more dangerous and direct involvement is not necessary. This brain is more dangerous. This idea that, the judiciary upholds, that Modi goes to every meeting and talks about urban excel. This idea that the brain is more dangerous is how there is a clampdown on speech. There is a clampdown on reporting. There is a clampdown on organizing. There is a complete silencing of all media. So, and I also think that the worst aspect of what happened in terms of prison, apart from the health abuse, apart from the custodial torture, apart from the mental torture of being in a solitary cell, was also that all his letters were vetted. He could not even express himself. So for 10 years, we read the prison notebooks of Gramsci. We are able to read even in an Israeli prison, Yahya Sinwar, the leader of the Hamas who got assassinated, even he was able to smuggle his novel out. Even Israeli prisons, it was possible to do this. But with Sai, what could he write in prison? His hand was in pain. It took him enormous effort even to finish a small letter. And what is smuggled out are these letters that were addressed to many people that was basically fractured poetry. You cannot even write poetry and call it poetry. It was letters in the form, fractured poetry in the form of letters that he managed to send to people. And that is what remains, in some sense, of what Sai's creative and artistic and intellectual contribution is. And most of all, let us never forget that, that just like Pragya Thakur is not in prison, just like Ram Rahim and other Babas are out on bail all the time, Sai was not even given parole to visit his mother's funeral. So this is the extent of which the state has, cracked down, tried to break this person. And he has shown the most fierce spirit, the most fierce resistance in order to, make out of it alive, in order to tell us that this system, the horrors of the system have an end, that it cannot go on forever. And I also want to talk something about Professor Sai in the very particular context of Indian academia. In Tamil Nadu, this is a very common conversation, but I don't know how in Hyderabad it's going to go down. I am not a supporter of identity politics. I am a Marxist. But we still have to say that Indian academia is the most Brahminized entity that exists ever. It is the most, Sanatana Dharma is not upheld in temples in India, it's upheld in the Indian universities. Sanatana Dharma, patriarchy, the sexual oppression of women, the exploitation of the working class, the consideration that people who are not Brahmin do not have intelligence, everything, every single aspect of this system manifests itself in the Indian university system. The Indian university system is the one which upholds neoliberalism, which upholds all the oppression of the Indian state, which is basically, whose ideology is counter-revolutionary ideology. And when you understand that, you understand why they did to Professor Saibaba what they did to him. If you are an academic who does not subscribe, if you're to their, the status quo ideology, if you are an academic who talks about class and caste at the same time, they made an example out of Professor Sai. They wanted to say to other academics, Bahujan academics, Dalit academics, Adivasi academics, even academics who are, Marxist but with outlook on caste, they wanted to tell them this is a lesson. if you speak out, if you challenge the Indian state, if you challenge state terrorism, if you talk about Mandal, and this I know because my mother fought for Mandal Commission for 18 years in an IIT. If you talk about Mandal, we will finish your story. We will put you through the worst kind of torture, and nobody will speak, nobody will be allowed to speak. And in this kind of world, and I speak about this also as an academician, like Professor Sai, but not with, his experience. I also taught English in a university for 4 years. And this is where I am very disappointed with what the English professors, English faculty, we have to step up. This kind of lukewarm response, this kind of, writing a tweet where, what has the English teaching fraternity, the English faculty, what have we done to grieve, to commemorate, to take forward Professor Sai's work? Because I think there is something about English teaching in India that I think no other subject has that scope, which is that you address everybody. You can, whether it is science students or math students or political science students, everybody has an English class. So English becomes this one place where you can teach to transgress. This becomes this one place where you have the freedom to express some ideas which may be considered radical. And Professor Sai was somebody, it has happened to one of our own, it has happened to somebody who's an English faculty. And when I see that there's either a very lukewarm response and there is no response in many places, a lot of people are thinking it is an activist who died, but it's also one of us who died. And I think this silence of the academic community, it leaves a lot to be desired, because I think the way in which Professor Sai saw the classroom, the way in which he looked at the teaching of text, the way in which he looked at novels, the way he looked at literature, he never considered them subsidiary, he never considered them outside of the political thing, he never considered them something in isolation. In the one very brief encounter that I had with him, we were sitting on his couch in his Delhi home and speaking. He was talking to me about Indian writing in English. I don't want this to be a detour. I think it's very essential and central to who Professor Sai was. And he was telling to me, that part of his research was to look at the post-colonial novel in English, the post-independence novel in English. And he said, all of Indian writing in English, all of Anglophone literature in English is basically Brahmin literature in English. And he said this, it does not address rural India at all. It does not address the problems of the working class at all. It does not address the lived reality of the Dalit Bahujan communities at all. It is a very elite, upper caste literature. And this is what Professor Sai was doing, not only in his human rights work, which Professor Haragopal spoke about, which is to talk about Adivasi resistance, to talk against corporatism, against militarism, but even in the intellectual domain, Professor Sai wanted to change things. He wanted to show a mirror to society, to shame society into thinking, this is what we have. Literature is a very powerful weapon, and what are you doing with it? What are you doing with this very powerful thing? So I think that somebody like Professor Sai is losing him is a loss that I don't think we can, ever bridge. But we can honor his memory in so many ways. And I also think, and I want Vasanta Akka to forgive me for saying this, that it's very hard to find, very romantic revolutionaries. You think, maybe Che Guevara was the last romantic revolutionary, but Professor Sai was so deeply in love, so much in love. And it's not just the poems, because I'm a poet, you can sit anything and write anything. But we were taking selfies, and I stood next to Vasanta Akka, and he said to me, no, you both are looking like you are the friends. You both are looking like you are a couple. You please come and stand on this side. And I could see in his eyes how, this beautiful possessiveness that he had towards his wife. It was so much, I cannot capture in words that, even me meeting her for 5 minutes and standing close to her, he was like, you come this side. And I felt, this is love. And it is so hard and so rare in this very corrupt world, in this very, laid back, or whatever it is that you want to call it, neoliberal, capitalist world, where people are so emotional and people are so, especially Professor Sai, he really believed, like all of his letters in prison, Not only do they address the colonial system, not only do they bear witness to oppression, not only do they talk about resistance, not only do they talk about what it means to be a prisoner, but also what it means to be a prison guard. He was also somebody who looked at love as a very political project. To Professor Sai, love was about optimism. Professor Sai, love was about how we will defeat. Love was about how the revolution will be successful. Because love contained in its heart hope. And to see that kind of, this very idea of this romantic revolutionary for me is beyond anything, because everybody is pessimistic. I mean, young people are, I don't know, Tinder, Grindr, I don't know where you find love. But there is some places in the world where love exists. And I'm just going to conclude my talk. I don't know how much time I have taken, but just maybe 2-3 minutes. So what I want to say is that, at least from my experience and my understanding and my, the way I have tried to talk or write about Sai, run some signature campaigns for Professor Sai, is that Comrade Vasanta is one half of Sai. It's not a joke, it's very sincere. She represents one half of him, and now that Sai is no longer with us, she represents all of him. Comrade, you have to carry the torch forward. I mean that, I'm saying this as your sister, I'm saying this as your comrade, that we all look up to you, that you have a huge gap to fill, and your memory, your presence, your words, it means so much to us. And I think for the rest of us, how do we continue Professor Saibaba's legacy? I think the first is that we learn to grow a spine. Professor Sai's spine had deformity from imprisonment, from polio, from 90% disability, from being in a wheelchair. But I think all the rest of us do not have any excuse for not having a spine. That we continue to speak for the people's resistance. We continue to speak in support of, the kind of atrocities that are being committed against people in this country, because that's what Sai was doing. That's what he would have done if he continued to be with us. And the second thing is that we also learn from Professor Sai to organize and to work in collectives. I mean, I speak this as a writer, and there is no other profession in the world that's more individualist than a writer. But I think we always come, history comes in cycles, and we also come to a moment when we have to work together. And I think we are at this kind of juncture in history where people have to learn to work in collectives. And a very pressing thing is that what is happening in central India now. I mean, those of you who are on social media, I'm not sure how much the mainstream media is covering it, is that in the name of Operation Kagar, in the name of what was earlier Operation Samadhan Prahar, all of this, the continuation of Operation Green Hunt. And now there's a lot of corporatization, a lot of land grab, a lot of militarization happening in Bastar. But it's also happening in Hasdio, where you see the trees, 1 million trees being felled for an Adani project. So, and I think, people have been displaced, there's encounters, and I think the state is very proudly claiming that just since January, 180 Adivasi people have been encountered in the name of being Maoist. So this entire Naxal scare, this entire Maoist scare, but also the way the resistance or, the killing of Adivasi people is labeled as terrorism, and it goes away scot-free, I think we'll have to talk about it. If we claim to be Indian, if I am a Tamil woman standing in Telangana and speaking to you, what brings us together is being Indian, then we also have the same responsibility towards our brothers and sisters, our Adivasi brothers and sisters in central India, in Bastar, in Hasdio, in Chhattisgarh, and wherever land grab is taking place. And I think this is one of the ways in which we can really pay our homage to Professor Sai, in which we can pay our salutes to him and continue the work that he was doing. I think the last two demands that we must make as a collective is for the demand for the repeal of the UAPA. Act like the UAPA has no place to exist in a democracy. The fact that, some of the greatest intellectuals of our time are in jail, the greatest young activists like Umar Khalid are in jail, the fact that the Bhima Koregaon prisoners have to go on a fast in order to demand, to be produced in court. in a case in which the trial has not even started. All of this makes us understand that the UAPA is an instrument of torture, is an instrument of state terrorism, is an instrument of state violence. And I think we have to stand out and stand up against it. We also need to demand and continue the actual work that Professor Sai was doing, which is the demand for the release of all political prisoners. So everybody who has been in charge of the committee for the release of political prisoners, whether it's Rona Wilson, whether it's Hani Babu, they find themselves in jail. This cycle cannot continue. This cycle has to break. This circuit has to break. That unless it becomes a demand from all the people, if there is only one individual making a demand, that individual is going to be jailed again in the UAPA. So this is something that we have to think about, collectivize and work about. And finally, I just want to end on something that, is going beyond the circumstances of today, which is to realize and as a society think about what the word terrorism means. Because in today's imperialist world order, the word terrorism is used to silence activists, professors, poets. It's used to paint entire resistance movements. So whatever happens to the people in Palestine, whatever happens to the people in Gaza, whatever happens to the people in Lebanon, they're all called terrorists. So when you call whatever happens to the people in central India, so the minute you apply whatever happened to the Tamil tigers, the minute you apply the word terrorism, you can do anything to people. You can kill them in custody, you can commit a genocide. And I think that, this is a broader conversation, but I really think that, we start calling out state terrorism, a state terrorism that killed Professor Saibaba, and look at what is happening to language in general. Having said this, thank you so much to the organizers, Comrade Lakshman, Comrade Venugopal, and Vasantaka for giving me this opportunity. Red salutes, Lal Salam, and Johar, Professor Saibaba.